As our month of the Bat draws to a close, and I've provided my thoughts on a number of Batman films, I'll now be providing a ranking. Shout out to Mask of the Phantasm and the Lego Batman movie for both being great, but for this ranking, I'll just be sticking to the live action takes on the character. I'll also be excluding both cuts of the Justice League, as they aren't really solo Batman films in my eyes. And in last place, we have what is likely most people's least favorite take on the Caped Crusader, we have Batman and Robin. Now, I won't lie, I almost had this film a few spots higher just because I enjoy watching terrible films from time to time. So bad their good movies are just fascinating to me. But objectively, this movie is a complete mess and is so far removed from what and who Batman should be as a character. George Clooney may have been able to be an alright Batman, but this script just does him absolutely no favors. And the general idea of Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy teaming up makes no sense. One wants to cover the world in plants, and the other wants to cover it in ice. I'm not really seeing the correlation here. Coming in at number 9 on my list, and I actually debated between this and the last film for a bit, but here we have Batman the movie from 1966. Now I can understand how someone who grew up in the 1960s and watched the Adam West Show while it was originally airing could really love this movie, but comparing it to films such as The Dark Knight is just laughable. This movie does not age well, and the shark repellent scene features perhaps the fakest looking shark I have ever seen. And the rogues gallery of villains here also feels like an odd mashup just to get the most iconic villains into the film. Now, the over-the-top campiness of this movie makes it somewhat enjoyable, but really hard to take seriously. And the main reason I edged it over the last movie is primarily due to the dynamic between Batman and Robin in this film. I like that they are looked at as equals in this movie, and appreciate the dynamic duo feel that they have here. Coming in at number 8 on my list, we have another bottom tier Batman film, but one that I do think is a decent step up in quality. We have Batman Forever. The fact that the studio couldn't get Michael Keaton back as Batman for this film is a really bad sign going in, and Val Kilmer is just really boring as the character. Similar to George Clooney, I feel like in a better film he could have been an alright Batman, but he just gets absolutely nothing of interest to do in this movie. The villain dynamic is also a bit odd, as Tommy Lee Jones tries to out Jim Carrey without their zaniness, and it just does not work at all. What edges this film over Batman the movie for me is the fact that both go for a campy tone, but Batman Forever at least has a better batsuit, better action, it is more believable just due to the more advanced technology. The introduction of Robin was also decently done here. The film establishes Bruce Wayne's affinity for him very well, and with the better script, I think Chris O'Donnell actually had potential to be a good Robin. The next film might be dead last on a lot of lists, and I can kinda see why, though I think it's a bit overhated. At number 7, we have Batman v Superman. And while I made an entire video about why this movie was a mess, check that out if you haven't already, but my general thoughts on this movie is that it is a beautiful wreck. That meaning that visually there are some great shots and borderline iconic Superman and Batman imagery, but the story is just so bloated, with this film trying to serve as a Batman origin story, a Man of Steel sequel, a Justice League setup, and an actual Batman v Superman film. Also, Lex Luthor does not work for me at all as the lead villain, and I think such a bleak take on the character of Superman was a big mistake. The 10 minutes or so of this movie that actually gives us Batman v Superman is pretty good though, and is a way higher high than any of the previous Batman films listed had, which is why this movie crept up all the way to number 7. The next group of films were all pretty close for me, as I think every film remaining is at least good, and a big step up from the previous 4, but coming in at number 6 we have Batman Returns. And I really like that this film presents Catwoman and Penguin as adversaries for Batman, but also Max Schreck as an adversary of sorts for Bruce Wayne, as it helps flesh out and highlight the dichotomy between Bruce Wayne and Batman, and his romantic relationship with Selina Kyle helps create conflict of interest between his two halves. And I do think that both Michelle Pfeiffer and Danny DeVito give great performances, and having Max Schreck in play to do all the truly deplorable things helps allow Penguin and Catwoman to be somewhat sympathetic villains. The only reason this isn't higher on the list is because the film is definitely a bit dated, and it goes a bit too far into the Tim Burton aspect and overall campiness for my personal taste. But moving on in the ranking, we have a film that I contemplated on for a while, but ultimately fell in at number 5. We have The Batman. And I think this is a really good Batman movie that falls short of being great. We had all the pieces here for it to be one of the best Batman films, but I think the ending felt very dragged out, the editing really could have been tightened up, and the portrayal of Bruce Wayne left a lot to be desired. But this film ranks as high as it does because it is excellently directed, builds up a very fleshed out version of Gotham City, and Robert Pattinson is good as Batman. I like the tone and direction they went in, and having a version of Batman that focuses in on the detective aspect of his character is something I look forward to being further explored in future films, as that is a niche of the character that hasn't been explored a ton in live action. And I thought all three villains were used very well in the film, though that one scene of the Riddler singing opera in Arkham Asylum was extremely corny to me. Next up on my list, I have one of the most influential Batman films of all time. It's Batman '89. This movie really set the tone for at least all of the good Batman live-action films to come, as this more dark and almost gothic take on the Caped Crusader was a much-needed shakeup from the campy Adam West iteration of the character. And I love the dynamic between the Joker and Batman here. The idea that they inadvertently created each other is fascinating, and though Heath Ledger is definitely the best Joker, I do really like Nicholson's role here, as he creates a nice even ground between campy and menacing with his performance. And I think the Vicky Vale love angle helps flesh out the Bruce Wayne aspect of our lead, as he's revealed to be much more down-to-earth than his lavish inheritance would lead people to view him. Where this film falters a bit for me is that it's a little dated, and I think the campiness goes a little too far at times, to the point that it clashes with the dark aesthetic of the film a little bit. By this point, you've probably realized that the top three are all members of the Dark Knight trilogy, and yeah, all three are amazing films, so that's probably not a major shock to anyone, but coming in third place, we have The Dark Knight Rises. And yes, there are some plot issues in this film that aren't present in Batman Begins or The Dark Knight, which is why they're higher. And while the Talia al Ghul twist really is a giant anchor weighing this film down, this movie has all the same strengths as the previous films in the trilogy. We have incredible performances all around, Nolan is still providing stellar directing, and the score is out of this world. And I like the open-ended ending to Batman's character, as whether or not you believe he died or survived the bomb, it works thematically as Batman became an everlasting symbol for Gotham to inspire change regardless. And Bane is awesome as the main villain here, as he's an imposing presence who also brings strategic acumen, which comes together to create this trilogy's most intimidating villain, and he provides us with quite a bit of quotable dialogue. Coming in at second place is a film that might be a little lower on most people's lists, but receiving the silver medal of mine, I have Batman Begins. And I love this film. I think it often gets slotted as the worst of the Nolan trilogy, but I emphatically disagree. I think Liam Neeson as Ra's al Ghul is phenomenal, and for my money is the second best villain of the Dark Knight trilogy. And this film is really the first time we get to see Bruce Wayne become Batman on screen. For the number of times we've seen his parents die and his mom's pearls get scattered, it's kind of crazy that this is the first time that we actually see the formation of the Batman. As in pretty much every other film, Bruce is just Batman already, and getting to see Bruce Wayne throw himself into the mud for 7 years and analyze criminal activity, and then train with the League of Shadows is awesome. And the final scene of the film where Rachel tells him that Bruce Wayne has become his actual mask is a perfect endnote, as this film in many ways is the story of the death of Bruce Wayne and the birth of Batman. And to the surprise of absolutely nobody, first place on my list is the same as about 99% of all Batman lists. I have The Dark Knight. There's not much to say about this film that hasn't already been praised. The casting across the board is phenomenal, and Heath Ledger provided the performance of a lifetime. And the Joker really was the perfect villain for this film, as Batman Begins presented Bruce with a villain that he could at least understand and reason with. But the Joker presents a new and much more challenging task, as he doesn't particularly want anything, he just wants to watch the world burn in chaos. Really, the only critique I've consistently heard against this film is the villainization of Batman at the end, but I don't mind it, as it kind of shows that Batman is human, and since he viewed Harvey as the hero to replace himself in Gotham City, it's the play he ends up making. Might not have been the most logical play, but it's the play that he wanted to make, and the film does a good job of setting up this ultimate decision. And there you have it, my take on how all the live-action Batman films stack up against one another. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to drop a like or subscribe, and if you agree or disagree with any of my rankings, I'd love to see your list in the comment section.